Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of the Broadreach podcast. And this is an episode that we want to do that's going to be totally about one of the skippers in the GGR. His name is Abhilash Tomy. He's come second in the GGR 2022, which just finished recently in 2023. But Abhilash, he's Commander Abhilash Tomy from the Indian Navy. He's a retired commander, and Abhilash is a man of legendary status. So we just want to do an episode dedicated to Abhilash to just talk about a few things, talk about his history and the GGR and how he managed to sail for 236 days, I think it was, Sean. And he's come second behind Kirsten. And it's an epic journey for a few reasons, but notably, Abhilash, he was the first Indian man to circumnavigate the globe in 2013, I think he finished, which is an incredible achievement. And then he decided he wanted to do it again, but finish on a podium. So he entered the GGR 2018, where he ended up in a massively violent storm, which if anybody wants to look back, there's a lot of really good recorded media. There's some SoundCloud calls. There was actually an Irish skipper, Gregor McGuckin, who we're going to reach out to at some point to try and get an interview with. He was in the same system. It was in the southern Indian Ocean. He also had to retire from the race because of the storm. Abhilash Tomy ended up being rolled. His yacht was rolled. He ended up coming out of the cockpit, and he actually ended up hanging onto the mast, Sean, which I only found out in the last 24 hours. He ended up hanging off the top of this mast, 7 or 8 meters in the air. He was suspended from a metal wire going through his watch. He fell, the boat righted itself. He fell about 8 meters onto a boom, onto his back. He ended up in the boat with a broken back, and he had to retire from the race. There was a huge international rescue operation. So he's come from all of that. He had to get pins in his back. He's come back from all of that, and he decided to do it again. And now he's finished second in the race. I mean, it's a journey of incredible courage, resilience. The fact that he, decided to come back and do it again. And now he's come second, but it hasn't come easy. And he actually almost didn't make it. 2 weeks before the GGR, the most recent GGR, Abhilash actually was the last skipper to get to the start line, which as we know, we've covered in previous episodes. Getting to the start of the GGR is one of the hardest things ever. And that's almost the hardest part of the race. But Abhilash was rushing to try and get there, and he had a collision with a ship. He broke his bowsprit. He had to do a repair that was worth about 50,000 euros. He managed to get the start line, and the rest is history, as they say. But Sean, we're just going to talk us through a little bit about some of the details of Abhilash's race.
Yeah, that was very well summarised, Shane.
Sean, start away.
Yeah, that was very well summarised, Shane. As you said, getting to the start line was actually a challenge for Abhilash, and I want to maybe focus on a couple of the overall race-related issues for Abhilash, and then we'll go into some of the detail on some of the repairs that he did, because he had quite a lot of issues along the way, he had some very kind of creative fixes for that. So I want to specifically zoom in on those later on. But just to kind of step back and zoom out for a second, first of all, and kind of highlight the achievement that this is for not just Abhilash himself, but for India, because one of the points that he talked about after the race, particularly in the press conference, was that the number of boats on one pontoon in Les Sables d'Olonne is more than all of the yachts in India. So if we just think about that, that's just one marina in France, and one pontoon of that marina is more than all of the yachts in India. So that puts into perspective what this achievement is. He also mentions, he references Cool Runnings. Remember that movie from back in the 90s that, like him doing around the world race coming from India is like Jamaica having a bobsleigh team. So I just thought that was brilliant. He didn't have time to test the boat, and that's due to some of the challenges that you said. He had an accident prior to the race. So Kirsten talked about having, 2 massive test sails, I think 16,000 nautical miles under test before she actually started the race. So Abhilash didn't have any time at all, and he was really down to the wire. He also had to divert his budget when he had that accident to actually make the repairs to the boat prior to the race. One thing that I thought was incredible after the race was how casually, and this applies to Kirsten as well, but how casually he was able to talk to or speak about his race routing. So it was all in his head. And he was talking about all of the different incidents that happened when he left the Bay of Biscay, went down past Trinidad, across the South Atlantic to Cape Town, and he was able to speak. He remembered dates, time frames of different pressure systems and where he was. And I just thought his recall for 8 months at sea was just, it was ingrained. The detail was ingrained in his mind, and it was fabulous to just see him speak about that with no notes.
Wow.
He also did the Tapio rescue. He was involved in the Tapio rescue, right? There was a storm that he was hit, and these are just a couple of things that I want to talk about specifically relating to his race. He was hit by 50 or 60 knots of wind on the 26th of January. Remember, Shane, we were talking about this because for those of you that follow the podcast, you know that myself and Shane have been watching the tracker every single morning, and sometimes you'll see something unusual in the way a competitor's route might change, and we'll be toing and froing on WhatsApp voice messages saying, have you seen this? Do you have any idea what's happening? Have you heard any updates on Facebook or Instagram to see is something up? But we couldn't figure out what was going on with Abhilash, and I will show it when I finished up this piece so people to illustrate what we saw on that day, and then now I'm going to describe what Abhilash said happened. So basically, on 26th of January this year, as he was crossing the Pacific Ocean, just above the no-go zone, he was dealing with about 15 knots of wind on Reef 1, and out of nowhere, the wind increased, and he put in more reefs, Reef 2, Reef 3, and some issue with the self-steering, some line slipped, and he was basically stuck on the tiller himself for 12 hours. So he was hand steering the boat for 12 hours. Normally you'd have this assistance from the hydrovane, which uses the wind, and you point the boat in a certain direction and it keeps it roughly in that direction. Well, pretty accurately, really. But there was a problem, and he had to hand steer the boat himself for 12 hours. During that time, the boat was crash jibing. He couldn't, whatever, it was so much wind that the wind was getting behind the mainsail, and the mainsail was slamming across the boat. It was that damaged his traveler. He also broke some battens on the boat. The battens are battens on the mainsail. The battens are like solid pieces of plastic or some kind of hard material that will keep the shape of the mainsail. One of those broke. At least one of those broke. He didn't even have time to close the hatch. So the hatch that's open from above deck to below deck was open at this time. And normally when there's going to be a lot of wind or a lot of water coming over the side, you put in storm boards to actually seal up the boat. He didn't even have time to get off the tiller for 30 seconds to put those in, because I guess his fear was that the boat would just go out of control and maybe roll. So he didn't even have that 30 seconds in all of that 12 hours to do anything. So he was literally stuck to the tiller, from what I understand, for 12 hours. And I can't imagine how difficult that could have been. And when night fell, which it did, and these things always happen. He couldn't even put on the navigation lights and didn't have a torch. So nobody would have seen him. Thankfully, there was no other boat around him, as far as we know. But they wouldn't have been able to see him if they were around him. And he talks about having two knockdowns in the duration of the race. One of them was on his birthday week, and he said the only party that he had was a party at I think he said the Millie Bar Club, which I think is a reference to the pressure, the Millie. That was the only party that he had. Also remember, Shane, as he was approaching Cape Horn, he got very close to that infamous lee shore where you have the prevailing kind of westerlies, southwesterlies, and he was kind of he was in a bad position, and a lot of us were kind of wondering, was he going to get out of it? And I know that he was in touch with GGR, and they were trying to figure out, how can he get off this lee shore? And he did, and he figured it out. But it was kind of, it was certainly worrying times at that moment. Some other major challenges he talks about is water. So we were under the impression from his tweets that he was down to about 1 liter of water a day. He wasn't. He was down to 1 liter that he was drinking 1 liter of water. He was actually down to 1 liter of water overall. That was for everything, for cooking, drinking. And he said he was actually only consuming 1 cup of water every 2 to 3 days.
Wow.
When the recommended, I actually checked this up, but when the recommended daily intake is around, say, anything from, say, 13 to 17 cups. So let's call it 15 cups of water a day. He was down to 1 every 3 days. And he talks about a tech, and this now is where we get onto the sort of creativity. He talks about how he cooked rice. So what he did was, and this was to preserve as much fresh water as he could, he'd soak the rice in seawater. The rice would absorb the water. He'd then throw out that water and boil it in fresh seawater, so it would be less salty. And then when it was boiled, he'd add fresh water to wash off the salt, and then he'd eat the rice. That was the technique that he developed to preserve, to use as little fresh water as he possibly could to prepare food.
Okay, yeah, using the seawater as much as he could.
Yeah, actually on the food, one of the things that he mentions that he wished he had done was brought more sugary snacks or more snacks and sugary drinks. And we'll talk about that when we get on to the episode about Simon next week, because he actually goes through in the detailed tour of his boat. He talks about some of the food and some of the kind of snacks and things he had on the go and ready for tricky situations. But yeah, I mean, it's really incredible what Abhilash faced during the race. And I think we said it 2 weeks ago that everyone that finishes is going to have an incredible story to tell. And he does reference his time in the Indian military as well as, maybe preparing him in some way. And he talks about the mental and physical toughness of the training that he went through in the Indian military. And I mean, obviously you can see that the respect that those guys had for him as well. They boarded the boat actually as he was approaching Les Sables d'Olonne, and they were there as he actually parked up the boat. They didn't have the lines ready though, just to point that out. And Don joked about that. But yeah, look, it was incredible. So overall, I mean, massive challenges that he faced in the race, the Tapio rescue. Yeah, so incredible. I don't know if you've anything to add to that, Shane.
Yeah, look, I think he's made of really, really tough stuff, Abhilash, and you can tell even by the rationing of the water there. And to complete something like the GGR, the self-sacrifice that you need to be willing to take on board is huge. And I think that's what separates some skippers from others. Like, we have all types of skippers, you have someone like Simon Corwin, he's very thoughtful and he's very controlled in he's a tacticianer, and he's a racer. But Abhilash he's a different breed of skipper, in my opinion. He's more of a Knox Johnston, like hardy, I'm going to get through it no matter what. Like, the toughness that, like, even that situation where he was on the tiller for 12 hours, you're talking about a guy who's been through an epic back-breaking role in 2018. Like the fight that he must have had at that moment, he must have, like, to just say, like, I'm going to have to leave the hatch open, I'm going to stay on the tiller for 12 hours. The resilience of that, like, a lot of, let's be honest, like 80 or 90% of people would not be willing to do that, you know, and that's what separates him. Yeah, I think the other thing that we have to mention really is he clearly rode the wave of the mental toughness of this one, and I think that was clear in the film drop, where there was a certain film drop where he wasn't very happy, and we spoke about it at the time, and it's to be expected, you know, and he was a bit critical about the race on some of the SAT calls. He was saying this isn't actually a race. But Don always maintained the same line with him, because Don and Abhilash go back a long time. But my point is, we saw the peaks and troughs of the mental fortitude and the mental toughness, and like, his story is incredible. It's kind of hard to believe. Like, the fact that you'd have a go off the GGR anyway, like the fact that he's had to go off it twice, the fact that he's circumnavigated the globe now twice. And he said to Don, actually, he's the first person from Asia to ever get on a podium for a circumnavigation of any kind. So he knows how poignant this is. And the way he's held himself since he got back in, the way he's talked about things, like you've said in the press conference, it's been really inspiring. You know, hopefully we could try and get an interview with him at some point. But obviously, like, he's been on TV and everything in India, and he is an inspiration to, you know, a country that's not huge on sailing. So yeah, he's a legend.
Yeah, look, that's brilliant, Shane, and I totally agree with everything you said. I'd forgotten about the film drop. That was in Cape Town, and because you know, but we didn't know the history of Don and Abhilash, and like you said, they go way back and they know each other really well. And Abhilash actually talked about that as well, and they joked about it in the press conference after. Look, what you said there, I was just trying to imagine in my head what it would have been like being on the tiller. You just want, like you said, so many people would just want to give up at that point.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine how tough that would be. And seeing water going into the boat and knowing all your electronics are down below, oh my God, I can't even imagine it. But he talked about having the repairs that he did make, Shane. He talked about doing them for people. So he said, for example, one repair was for his wife, one repair was for his child, one was for his country, and one was for Les Sables d'Olonne. So that was a beautiful line that came out of the press conference, yeah. And I want also his wife's name. I hope I've got this right, but it's Urmimala, and I think it means stream of ocean waves or string of ocean waves. So that also came out during the press conference. So yeah, like, really nice. I want to get into his MacGyver skills. So, like, we've painted sort of the broad picture of the challenges that he had, but some of the specific stuff that he did is just mind blowing, to be honest. So he had at one stage he had a halyard which was stuck up the mast. So the halyard is used to pull up a sail, like a mainsail, a foresail, a staysail, whatever. But if it's stuck up, and this has happened to anyone that's ever sailed a boat, has got stuck up at the mast, and when it's stuck, like, there's only one way to get it down, really, which is to go to a crane and go up the crane and get it, or else go up the mast, one or the other. And usually most people will have gone up the mast at some point to get it. But he obviously either it was too dangerous to go up the mast, or didn't want to go up the mast, or couldn't, whether it was due to his back or whatever, but didn't want to go up the mast. So, and I don't know if I don't think I've talked to you about this, Shane, but what he did was he got fishing hooks, right?
Oh yeah.
And he how did he do it? I think did he send them up on another halyard? I think he must.
Yeah, I think he did, actually. I remember the SoundCloud call, and I remember talking to you about it, and we were trying to figure it out, because I was asking you, because you've obviously the sailing experience, and I was trying to figure out, how did he do this?
Yeah, look, it's unreal. He sent hook. He somehow attached hooks to another halyard, sent that up the mast, and the hooks grabbed the halyard that was stuck at the top. And after a few goes, he managed to pull the actual halyard down, and then he had both of them down on deck. That's like, it's so clever. He also, remember the problem with the self steering, and he was using the chart. He was chopping up the boat, the inside of the boat, the chart table. The kitchen, I don't know if he had a table on the actual, in the saloon, but he was chopping up any bits of wood he could find to help him steer the boat. And eventually he ran out of stuff, and he ended up using the toilet door, like the door of the heads, to actually steer the boat. And I don't know if it's the exact same mechanism, but eventually he ended up using part of the anchor. So the anchor is used normally to stop the boat. Like when you're in an anchorage, or you're trying to stop the boat either overnight or from drifting or whatever. He used it to steer the boat, and that's certainly a first in terms of what I've heard. So like, his creativity is unreal, and he doesn't see them as problems. He sees them as fun. He sees them as challenges. He said that he would have gotten bored, and that maybe he would have tried to save his soul if he didn't have all of that. That's what he said.
Yeah, he's a bit of a comedian, Abhilash. To be fair, he's very sharp.
He is. He is.
He's very sharp off the mark.
He's very witty, and then I guess the final piece that I wanted to cover in terms of the details, Shane, and we're big on this because we just love to understand what people did in heavy weather. And he did. I don't think he used. Now, I'm open to be corrected on this if anybody has more detail on this. But as far as I can tell, I think he was just sailing on bare poles. So he just took down. That just means he didn't have any sails up. So I don't know if he ran warps or a drogue. I understand that he didn't. So happy to be corrected on that if anybody can clarify. But as far as I'm aware, and I was listening out for this, all I could see was that he was just running on bare poles and didn't run warps, didn't run a drogue, didn't have a sea anchor or anything else. So that was pretty much his storm tactics. I guess it's very much dependent on what conditions that you're faced with as well, and maybe things would have changed depending on the conditions that he was faced with. That's pretty much it, Shane, in terms of the kind of more detailed stuff. If you want as well, I can show maybe that detour that he took on the 26th of January. We can do that in a couple minutes.
Just before you show that, Sean, I just wanted to say a couple of things. We just wanted to say that there are GoFundMe pages for a lot of the skippers, because as we know, the GGR is very, very costly. So we will share as many of them as we can find on Facebook and stuff. We'll share all the links under this video. So the other thing was, Don has been doing walk-ons on the GGR YouTube, and they're brilliant. He did one with Simon. He did one with Kirsten this morning, which I need to catch up on. Hopefully he'll do one with Abhilash and we can see the toilet door and all the MacGyver repairs. That'll be amazing. So look, Sean, I'll let you share that clip of the detour before we finish up.
Yeah, and like I just want to reiterate what you've just said. The Simon tour of the boat is absolutely fascinating for people who are into sailing, people who are not into sailing, because he covers a broad spectrum. Some of it is quite technical, relating to issues that he had in the boat, but it's absolutely fascinating. And just to see the inside of his boat and how he's done certain things, and I thought it was absolutely incredible. And I can't wait to see. The Kirsten one actually was happening just as we started. This morning. I
can't wait to watch it.
yeah. So we'll catch up on that after we wrap up here. But I'll just show this quickly, just to kind of explain what it is, the type of thing that we're looking out for. And when you're watching this, like, if this might seem like a very small thing, but when you're watching it every day and you're glued to it, you do notice these things, and you notice any kind of unusual change in direction, is particularly if you'll be looking to see, do the wind conditions explain that? And in this case, they didn't really, from what we were looking at. But it was obvious that something was kind of maybe happening, because Kirsten was very close to Abhilash at the same time, and she didn't make a detour, so we knew something was up. So I'll just share it now. Yeah, so you have it here, and this is the playback function, by the way, in the tracker. So you can actually use these controls here to play back the race. So I've now gone back to the 24th of January, 7 a.m. And you can, I'll just play it and show you. You can actually see the boats moving here, and you can increase the speed to speed up and slow that down. I'll just leave it as it is for the moment, because you'll see this detour. So we're on to the 25th now. And I didn't know it was the 20th. I'd forgotten it was the 26th until the press conference when he talked about it. But here we are. You see he starts to make a change in direction. He's clearly going off. He goes off to the north. And the red line is what's called the rum line, which is the closest distance to the finish line in Les Sables. And you can see here that there's kind of wild swings in his direction. And you can see Kirsten is taking a much straighter course. So this is kind of at the point where we were trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember, so I'm just going to stop it there. And you can really see it now. I think it's very obvious there that the shifts that he was making in his course in comparison to Kirsten allowed Kirsten to take the lead. All we knew at that point was that there was some issue. Health related issue, and I think that when that wind came up and the hydro rain broke, I think he had issues with his back, and his back spasmed after being on the helm for 12 hours. So that did have consequences, Shane, and I don't know if we had discussed that in detail, because I only found out about that in the press conference, but that did have an impact. And it meant that he needed to slow the boat down. And I think he was possibly in contact with some, there's medical teams that they can contact when there are issues on board. And that's all absolutely allowed. But eventually he pushed through. He pushed through that. Yeah. It just adds to everything you talked about in terms of mental fortitude. That is the issue that happened. And for us, it's so easy to see this on a screen. And, we can talk and chat about how difficult it is. Imagine what it's like to be in that situation. So look, unbelievable. Congratulations to Abhilash. We're massive fans. Yeah. It's incredible what he's done. And he again, his team have been supportive of us as well. So we just want to say thanks.
Yeah, massive thanks to Abhilash's media team who shared a few of our posts on Instagram. The guy's a hero. What a legend. And thanks again for tuning in. We will keep an eye on Captain Goog and Jeremy and see the completion of the race. And we will do a recap then, I think, on everybody. We'll do an exciting episode. We'll get the maps out and we'll do a big recap. And there'll be a lot more content to come. So I think that's about it, Sean, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And we'll see you for the next episode of the Broad Reach podcast. So thanks a million, and we'll see you next time.